Hey folks, Aaron and I are taking a short summer break, so we're doing another video rewind episode to one of our favorite interviews from last year with jazz legend Kamasi Washington. You can watch the video on our Substack at designbetter.com. We hope you're having a great summer and enjoy the episode.
It's hard to really explain what makes a good song a good song. But you can put a piece of that deeper self of who you are. Not that your body is not yourself, but there's another part of yourself that we can't see. And if you put that into what you're doing, it speaks to people. There's something in all of us that wants a connection on that level.
Jazz is a constantly evolving art form, offering some of the richest lessons in creative collaboration. A melody and chord progression provides the foundation, but as each musician brings their unique improvisational perspective, the music takes on unexpected, transformative shapes.
If you ask any fan of the genre, who is it that's pushing jazz into new territory, Kamasi Washington's name will most certainly come up, likely at the very top. His 2015 album, The Epic, won him the American Music Prize and stands, in our humble opinion, as one of the greatest jazz records of the 21st century. Kamasi also contributed to Kendrick Lamar's Grammy-winning record To Pimp a Butterfly. He scored Michelle Obama's Netflix documentary Becoming, and he's collaborated with musical legends like Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Lauryn Hill, Nas, Snoop Dogg, Chaka Khan, and so many more.
In this episode, we spent an evening with Kamasi exploring his creative process, what he's learned from his collaborators, his philosophy on collaboration, and his latest album, Fearless Movement. This is Design Better, where we explore creativity at the intersection of design and technology. I'm Eli Woolery.
And I'm Aaron Walter. You can get ad-free episodes, bonus content, discounted workshops, and access to all our monthly AMAs with big names in design and tech by becoming a Design Better Premium subscriber. It is also the best way to support the show. Visit designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe to learn more. Kamasi Washington, welcome to Design Better.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am such a huge fan of your work and excited to talk to you. It's always fun to start from the beginning to find someone's origin story before getting in deep about the work. So you were born into a pretty musical family. Your dad, Ricky Washington, is a professional saxophone and flute player, also taught music, teaches music, perhaps still. And your mom was a high school chemistry teacher. Could you maybe paint a picture for us of the Washington household in like the mid-'80s? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is a science teacher, but she actually plays flute too. And I had a grandfather play violin and great-grandfather played saxophone. My uncle played organ. I have an aunt, Lulu, that's a dancer. My older brother played piano too. My younger sister, she wasn't born in the 80s, but she's an amazing painter as well. And I have another sister that's a great designer. She even directed one of the videos for my album. So yeah, I had a very artistic household, and music was definitely one of the big centerpieces of that. And my father, amongst my generation, was definitely the driving force of that. He's a musician and he was a music teacher. He was just someone that really believed in honing your creativity the way you were going to do it. It was a situation where if I was practicing, I was cool, but if I was watching TV, Pops was he was going to be on my head.
So I read a couple different versions of this, but somewhere between the ages of 2 and 3, maybe you already started, you got your drum set, you already started with your drum set. And just reading that, man, this guy must be a prodigy. But from one of the interviews I was listening to, you said one of your brothers was actually considered the prodigy, and sort of maybe it took some of the pressure off you and you could kind of get your own thing going. Is that true?
Yeah, I had an older brother that was more of a prodigy. I mean, we all played music young, but he was good young, And so, yeah, he kind of took a lot of that attention, because, when you're coming from a musical family, there can be some expectations and things like that.
Mm.
And so I kind of got to just be a kid that was playing music, music was kind of just fun for me, while all those kind of peering eyes of how good are you going to be when you're 5? He kind of caught that. And so, what ended up happening is music kind of stayed in a very positive energy for me. There was no pressure with it, until I got a little older.
So you've got a creative, stimulating environment as you're growing up. You've got some guidance and structure, but it's not too much pressure. And then you get this great opportunity to go to a high school in LA, the Academy of Music of Alexander Hamilton High School. That seems like a pretty unique educational experience. Like my son, he's a freshman right now. He's studying AP Gov and taking kind of the standard stuff, but you got to focus on music. Talk to us about what that experience was like and how you changed in those 4 years as a high schooler.
Yeah, it was great. There were all different types of ensembles. So I was in jazz band, orchestra, wind ensemble, electronic music, piano, theory. We had like beautiful 9-foot grand Steinway pianos. There was a whole kind of music school within the school. So there was like a music school, humanities school, and then like just a regular public school. There were a lot of resources. And they did a really great job of giving you a very well-rounded musical education pretty early. I was learning different styles of music. They were very good about teaching you about like etiquette, being on time. You learn how to read and be professional, do all these types of things. At the same time I was at Hamilton, my father's teacher, Reggie Andrews, he had a band called the Multi-School Jazz Band. So after leaving my music high school, I would go to another music after school situation with a lot of the best young musicians around the city. And that really was like, as good as Hamilton was, and Hamilton was great. There were a lot of great musicians, and I was inspired by a lot of those kids. When I went to multi-school and I heard people like Isaac Smith and Terrence Martin and Stephen Bruner and Ronald Bruner Jr. and Ryan Porter, I was just completely blown away. So I had a really great musical education, in my formative years.
What did that do for your confidence, your motivation, like to create a drive in you? Did that change the way that you were approaching music?
Yeah, I actually when I joined the multi-school jazz band, I had a moment where we played the Playboy Jazz Festival, and I was serious about music, but I was lightly serious. Those other kids in that band, they were serious. And Reggie Andrews, he gave me a solo. I didn't think I had a solo. We played the Playboy Jazz Festival with 17,000 people. When going into it, I didn't think I had a solo. And I'll never forget, we were playing Red Clay by Freddie Hubbard, and he pointed to me, and I turned around. I'm like, he's not talking to me, is he?
So someone was standing behind me?
And I did my best, but I just really wasn't happy with where I was. I loved music, and in that moment, I didn't like the way I felt. And I was like, you might really shed real hard this summer. And that kind of started me on this path of like growth. And like music is an interesting thing. It's like the better you get, the more you want to get better. As you get better, the desire to get even better than that grows. And the more you get out of the music, the more fun music becomes, and the more it really just becomes food for your soul. I remember I came back after that summer, I had grown a lot. And I remember everybody kind of like a little bit shocked. And they're like, what happened? And I was like, oh man, I didn't want to get embarrassed no more.
Yeah, that is fascinating that like shame or embarrassment can be a motivator. Do you know Julian Lange, this guitarist?
Oh yeah.
He had the same thing, same story. Like when he was a kid, like going in for lessons, he had a couple moments where he was embarrassed, where, his teacher would ask him if he knew like a diminished chord or a certain scale or something. And he's like, I don't know. And I don't ever want to have that feeling again that I don't know. And it just lit a fire under him.
Yeah, music it could be the love of your life, but it can also break your heart. Because you end up loving it so much, you always want the good for them. And it wasn't that I was doing bad for my age. I think that's the important thing about like kids kind of seeing other kids. Like, I would listen to the record, but those are like adults and people that they felt kind of distant. When you hear somebody your age kind of making the music the way you wish you can make it, it was inspiring for me. I don't know if it was shame, but it was more like it kind of gave me a clear perspective on where I was and where I wanted to be. You can kind of lie to yourself. Like if you're kind of serious, but you're around a bunch of people that are halfway serious, then you think you're doing good. But then you get around some kids that are like really, really, really on it, then you kind of know, oh man, I need to practice.
Mossy, one of the first big artists that you toured with was Snoop Dogg. I'm a big fan of his. So are my kids, all that stuff. I'm just curious, like you speak to your love of music and just rewinding earlier in your childhood. It sounded like artists like Snoop were a big influence. And there was also danger, like in South Central LA, where I believe you grew up, that you might get drawn into a different track, kind of more of a gang track. And from one interview I listened to, he said that that can happen at a really young age, but it was really in part your love of music that kind of kept you away from that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when I started playing with Snoop, I was much older, and the reality is that a lot of times that path is something that you get kind of swept into pretty young. You know, like elementary school. People don't realize these are just kids, and they don't really realize what they're getting into. Until they get a little older, and then by the time you're a little older, you're kind of stuck. And so, yeah, for me, developing a love for music so early, it gave me a focus. I also had other like educators, non-musical educators when I was young, who really just kind of pointed out the pitfalls of the society that I was living in and how they were traps and how to not fall into those traps. So on the subconscious level, I had music, and on the conscious level, I had people going like, hey, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. I was like, oh yeah. And so when I got a little older, I was already fully on my path. But before music is, kind of when I discovered NWA and Dre, and then a little later, Snoop. I never lost my love for that style, for that music, for that feel, that G-funk, that whole thing. And when I was a young musician, I definitely gravitated more towards music that was technically difficult. Young musicians, that's what you kind of gravitate to. I listened to Snoop and people like that, but I was studying Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, that kind of stuff, Kenny Garrett. And then after high school, Terrace Martin started working with Snoop, and he wanted to take a band out. And I remember when I first started playing with Snoop, I would hear the music they wanted to play, and it seemed like it was simple, but there's different facets to music. There's technical side, but then there's kind of what you're playing, and then there's how you play it. And that's kind of what I learned with Snoop. And, I learned about feel. I learned about phrasing. I learned about blending, these real subtle things. But that's what that music was really all about. There was no hard lines to learn. It was about like, how much could you make this little simple line groove? How well could you phrase together with the other horn players? How well could you blend? How well could you make what you're playing sound like it was meant to be there? Because a lot of times we had to make up our part because there was no horn part in the music. So we had to make up our part and make it sound like it was an integral part.
One of your superpowers is that you're just omnivorous with music. Like you eat it all and you process it all, and you're, sort of like pulling the best of your favorite things together. I found it super interesting that when you went off to college at UCLA, that you studied ethnomusicology. What might have happened is either A, go gig and start a professional path right away, or B, go deeper into theory. But you took a different path with ethnomusicology. I wonder if you could talk about why that and how that influences you today.
When I went to school, one, I was looking to learn. I understood the reality of beyond wanting to kind of teach at like a high school or junior high school level. My musical degree was just a piece of paper. So I really went to school to learn, and so when I went to UCLA, I was looking at both programs, and I realized that there was so much music in the ethnomusicology department that I was just completely unaware of. I had no idea anything about that. And I was already kind of studying a lot of what I was going to learn in the regular music school. And the reason why I picked UCLA also was that they were just very willing to let me kind of make my own curriculum in a way. I took classes from the music department, and I also took classes that were not musical, that expanded my mind. I took calculus, and I took science classes, and I took a lot of history classes, philosophy classes. And I was really there to just expand my mind. And I was at the same time still working professionally. And so part of me wish I would have taken school a little bit more seriously, but I did learn a lot. And I think that all the things that I learned, I've tried to use them in life. I try to look at it as me gaining some tools I can use, I can add, whether they be different concepts of how to make music, different scales, different ways of thinking about what music is. different ways to think about what life is and learning about history and understanding the plight of humanity. That adds to the fabric of who you are, which adds to the music. I was definitely had that young musician want to just get out there and get and go, and I did miss a lot of school while I was at UCLA. I was touring a lot with Snoop and other people, so I was missing class and stuff like that. But I did kind of approach school as like a place for me to learn, more than a place to get a degree.
Being on tour with Snoop Dogg is not a bad excuse. I think I let any of my students go.
Oh yeah. I used Snoop, even when I wasn't touring with Snoop, he was my regular excuse. I had to miss class. I was like, I got the highest percentage chance that this teacher is gonna care about me.
That's great. All of those things you just mentioned too, like sociology, philosophy, and so forth. I feel like it's in your music and it's in your approach to your music. And it's often these adjacencies. People get super focused on a craft. If it's design or painting or music, they just focus on that thing solely and they lose those adjacencies, which are just rich sources for creativity.
Yeah, I mean, most of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to communicate something. To me, music is a great communication tool. I think most of the music that we love, you love it because it's saying something to you on some level. Some people have the ability to marvel at someone's just kind of what they're playing. But most people, connection to music is something a little bit more, And to me, you don't have to really pick one or the other. But I do think that if I had to pick one, I would pick to be able to express something, to say something, to play something that is meaningful. And to me, all my technical ability and studies are kind of in service of that. I'm learning these skills. I'm learning the instrument. I'm studying harmony. I'm studying different scores and all these other things to try to interpret this kind of wall of possibilities that kind of lives inside of me, that was given to me, basically. I think that's kind of the journey of every musician, is that you have this music in you, but you don't know how to get to it. Learn and study and practice to find different ways to get to the music that's kind of already in there.
You talked before a little bit about the difference between creating your own music, that self-expression you talk about, and then working with another group, whether that's a larger ensemble or someone like Snoop Dogg, where your own self-expression is maybe a little subsumed to the job that you need to do for that particular band or artist. Can you talk a little bit about those two different modes of work and how you approach them?
Yeah, it's like sometimes you're the construction worker, sometimes you're the architect. And most times you're both. And so for me, if I'm going to come and try to make music for someone else, I kind of take that seat. That's then about me kind of figuring out your vision and trying to figure out what you're trying to accomplish and trying to see where do I fit in to help make that happen. Whereas my own music is kind of about, like I said, searching within myself to find something. In the process of making music with other people, you end up searching within yourself as well, because they're like, oh, I need this kind of thing. So then you got to look inward and see, do I have one of those? Oh yeah, I have one of these. Here you go. Both things are beautiful, because as much as I love making my own music, I love making beautiful music regardless if it's mine or someone else's, So if someone else has something beautiful to make and I can be a part of that, that's its own type of beauty, that's its own reward, and it feels good in its own way,
So just building on that idea, there's something that happened from when you graduated UCLA up to 2015. I wonder if you could help us fill in the gap, because 2015 was a very big year for you. You contributed to Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar, some great orchestration that's in that record. It's still to this day like just such a beautiful piece. And same year, you dropped a major record of your own, The Epic. What happened in that 10 years from you're touring with Snoop, you're playing with different people, you're learning at UCLA, and then all of a sudden you kind of come out fully baked in 2015 that you're a force?
Well, I mean, the reality is that I was cooking the whole time.
Okay. All right.
We were in the kitchen the whole time. When I was playing with Snoop and I was playing with Lauryn Hill and Raphael Sadiq and Chaka Khan, I would go out and play with them, and I would come home and we always had a gig somewhere to go play. We would literally come off the road, just play for 60,000 people and then go from the airport straight to a gig to play for 60 people to play, you know?
That's amazing.
So that want to bring to life the music that I had inside of me was always there. And I was always trying to do that. And so basically what happened is, I was playing for a lot of different people, not just the famous people, like non-famous people too. We were talking about that the other day, like how many songs you think you learned? It was like, man, it got to be hundreds of thousands because I was just playing for so many different people and doing so much stuff, you know. I grew up with a kind of a brotherhood of musicians and brotherhood and sisterhood of musicians. And we all were fortunate to be in demand. We're all on gigs with legends and people that we grew up idolizing. But we also valued each other's contribution to music. It was like, as much as I love playing with Chaka, I also love playing with Patrice, I love playing with Stanley Clarke. I love playing with Thundercat. And I love playing with Brandon Coleman and Ryan Porter and Miles Mosley and Ronald Bruno Jr. and Tony Austin and all those guys and Cameron Graves. And so we would always make time for each other. It would be difficult sometimes because we were working and we had to make a living. We had to eat. We had to pay rent, all those types of things. But whenever we could, we come together and we make our music. A lot of us also are second generation musicians. What you get to around actually 2010 was this feeling that the music industry, whatever the industry that we're working for, seems to be interested in us as sidemen, meaning like they want us to help them for other people, but it didn't really feel like there was a lot of interest in the music that we ourselves were making. No one was saying like, all right, now you go make your record. It was like, all right, here's another artist for you to make music with or for. And it was just like, kind of like, that's what we were doing. And I think amongst all of us, it wasn't just me, we had this feeling that like, my dad used to always tell me stories about musicians and music that he and his friends would make. And he would tell these stories and it would sound so amazing. He'd tell us about guys that would just sound so good and they were doing this and that and that. And I would say, man, is there a record or an album or something like that? And he'd say, nope, we didn't make an album. And we all kind of got to this place where we were like, you know what? If nothing else, we should just document what we're doing right now. Even if it doesn't ever go nowhere, let's just make it. Let's just make some music. So we started talking about doing that. Myself, Miles Mosley, Thundercat, Stephen Brunner, who wasn't known at this point. We know how dope he was. We all just started talking about this. And so I was making a little bit of money with Snoop, and I actually made a little recording studio in my dad's house, in his garage. Like a lot of the Golden Age of Apocalypse, Thundercat's first album, we recorded a lot of that there. So I recorded some stuff there, and we just started recording ourselves. We just got into this thing of like, let's document where we're at right now. And so Stephen made that record. Flying Lows is something that we had met years and years and years ago, and we saw his trajectory. He was doing really well. And he and Stephen started working together. And when Stephen dropped Golden Age of Apocalypse, it did great. And that really lit a fire in us. It was like, man, maybe people, even though it doesn't seem like anyone wants to put our music out, the fans love this music. And we kind of knew that already because we would play gigs all over LA and we would play all different types of places. And people loved the music they were making. There was no way for us to get this music outside of Los Angeles. Inside of Los Angeles, but we couldn't get it outside of Los Angeles. And so we all decided that we were going to just put everybody else's music that we were working on, getting paused, and we were just going to focus on our own music, and all of us are going to make a record. All of us. Because look what Thundercat just did. Look what Robert Glasper is doing. The movement was starting to move, and we felt like we had something to add to that. And so we all got together, and at that moment, I was also working with Lotus on some of his music, and he expressed an interest in maybe me doing a record for Brain Feeder. And I thought about making a record in my home studio, but I felt like I wanted to go and like record, because in my home studio, it was on me. Like if one of the mic wasn't working, I had to go fix it.
Right.
I wanted something done, I had to get the piano tuned, and I wanted to go and just like record and just only focus on music. So we rented a studio together, and we was in there, and it was like a music sweatshop. And for a whole month, we just recorded as much music as we could, because we just felt like If nothing else, I want to be able to, if I tell my kids that we sounded good back in the day, that's play for them. It's the truth.
Yeah.
We did. I know I'm old now, but look, listen to me now. So after that, I made that record and took it to Lotus and Flying Lotus, and he liked it. He believed in the vision. And then it was just kind of was sitting there. I guess waiting for fate to give me the right time to put it out, because I finished the record in 2013. I was sitting on it. Hardest thing in the world to do, because I really believed it. It was just, it was God. It was waiting for the right moment, for the momentum of the music scene to be right for that record. And so 2015 happened, and I really feel like Kendrick turned a musical page for everybody. And when he turned that page, I was like, I just went ahead and slipped my name on in there. And it was beautiful, and we've been able to like really be blessed to be able to share the music that's in our heart. That's a real blessing. I don't take it for granted, because there's a time where I didn't really think that I was going to be my reality. I thought that I would make good music, but I probably would only get to share the music I made for other people. Having the opportunity to then share my own music and have people understand it, relate to it, love it. It's a very big blessing. Yeah, the epic came out, and it just felt like it was connecting with the people.
I wanted to ask you quickly about improvisation versus orchestrating a piece. And as designers, we lean on improv in instances where we're brainstorming new ideas, ideating on ideas. And we had a guest a while back, John Cleese from Monty Python, who has this idea of open versus closed modes of thinking. And when you're open, it's sort of more improvisational. You're trying things, you're trying all these different things to see what works. And then the closed mode, you go and execute on it. And I'm wondering if there's any parallels in your work where there's sort of more of an improvisational phase, and then you move to a more structured phase, or maybe it's something completely different.
Yeah, there's always improvisation. There's always space for the moment, because to me, the music always has the final say. Musicians that I grew up playing with, all of us, we kind of all have that philosophy of like, if something happens in a moment that's not on the page, that's beautiful. That supersedes the music no matter what. But I will say that when we're making an album in general, there's more of a vision for the songs. When we get in the studio, I have a vision for the song. Now, someone could play something and change that vision. But I do come in with a vision, I come in with an idea of something that I want to get to, But when we play live, I deliberately go, let's try to explore all the possibilities. Let's just go to all the different places. It's almost like trying everything on the menu. You go to a restaurant that's known for the, for the burgers, and you had the burger. So now you want to like, okay, now let's try all the other stuff on the menu and just see what's what. We treat each song like that each night. And so, for me, that's kind of like our version of that. Because we always improvise. That's part of the culture of jazz, coming in. But recording versus live, and when we play live, that's when we're exploring all the possibilities. When we're recording, that's when we're trying to realize a vision. And they're both valid, and they're both important.
One thing that I'm really struck by in all of your work is there's a few things. There's a great deal of layering, there's complexity, but it doesn't feel complex for the sake of being complex. There's a lot of pieces to it. There's a lot of depth, and the vision in the epic and your new record, Peerless Movement, it comes through very well. But I'm always struck by how you are generous with, the musicians with you. And last year I saw Herbie Hancock perform in South Carolina in Greenville. And I was blown away by, here's a legend on stage with super talented people. And he'd give them like as much time as they wanted to build something. He had a vision and they had some sort of like agreement, but he was going to give people as much space as they needed to build something. And then that would come back around into Herbie's vision, his orbit, whatever. How did you think about that when you were recording the epic? Because that seemed like it had like lots of structure and clarity. Was it also open to collaborators' visions as well?
Yeah, I have a place that I want the music to go, but I have no ego involved in it. So it's not like where I want the music to go is where it should go. And none of the musicians I play with approach the music with any ego. We all check our ego at the door. And so what happens is, if it's my record or if it's whatever, my music that we're playing, then obviously I've spent more time with it. So I'm going to come in with a clearer vision for the music than anyone else. So with my vision that I have for it, a lot of times is the one that we end up kind of going with. But like, there's a song called The Rhythm Changes, and we recorded it on the Epic. But before we recorded it on the Epic, I recorded it at my house. So when I wrote that song, I wrote it with a bass line that was like, doom, dun, 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 dun. It was like, it was there was a rhythm. It was doom, ding, goom, ding, goom, ding, goom, ding, goom. It had a little bit of a Latin kind of almost feel to it. So I wrote that down and I gave it to Thundercat. And Thundercat looked at it and he went, and then Ronald came in with a drum beat and it was like, that is not what I wrote. But it's better than what I wrote. And so that's what we're going to do. So what happens is, I think with most musicians that really are kind of putting the music first is, I want the best musical experience that we can have. And so I'm playing with these amazing, great musicians. It wouldn't make any sense for me to not give the listener an opportunity to hear them make music. I look at it like more like that. It's just like, well, this is just what makes sense. Brandon Coleman up here playing piano, I gotta give him some space to play all this wonderful music he has in him. I try to offer up the best musical experience. I understand I'm going to make room for myself. There's going to be a time and a place for me to offer up something for sure, but I'd rather give 2 offerings and then Brandon also be able to give an offering than I give 3 offerings and he doesn't get to give in. That doesn't serve the music. The music is better served with maybe 2 offerings for me and 1 for him. It's better served that way. The music is better.
You've talked about the experience working on To Pimp a Butterfly with Kendrick Lamar, and it seems like it's maybe similar and different at the same time, that he's like very detail-oriented, focused, and he wants to be involved or witnessing kind of like what contributions are going to come into the record. Could you just talk a little bit about what that process feels like comparatively?
Yeah, his process, it's equally open. It seems like he gives space to anyone that he's working with to give whatever they feel like the music needs. And he takes it all in and then he carves out what he needs, what he wants from that. And in that, he's a master at getting the best of whatever you give him. Most of the musicians I work with, people all work with artists, and you gave them 7 diamonds, and you only used 2 of them, and them 2 that he used, you kind of snuck those 2 in there, Everybody doesn't always perceive the beautiful things, and so Kendrick is a master at perceiving those things and finding a way to implement them while maintaining his vision, and a lot of times, at least from my perspective, like he and, Soundwave and Chairs, like they have a vision that's clearer to them than it is to me, And so when I work with Kendrick, I've learned to give him the full pie, Here's everything I'm hearing. And then he's a master at taking the parts that I gave him that work with what he's going for, and that's kind of his approach.
I wanted to ask you about different modes of creativity, and going to start in kind of a strange place, but the video game Street Fighter. And I heard you talking on this other show about playing Street Fighter. I grew up with that too. I don't play it so much anymore, but I dropped endless quarters into an arcade with friends, played Street Fighter. And I was frankly terrible at it. I'd use the sumo wrestler guy often with like the slapping hand motion. That was like my good. But you talked about how it's not difficult for you to focus on something. If it's something you love doing, you will focus, whether that's a game like a Street Fighter game or music, like practicing endless hours of music. And I think a lot of the people that we talk to that are very creative, oftentimes maybe have ADHD diagnosed or undiagnosed and may have trouble focusing on certain things, but can focus very well on others. Yeah, I'm just curious how that focus has affected the way that you approach your own creativity.
I definitely have trouble focusing. I probably have trouble breaking my focus.
Mm.
Walls could be falling down. Oh, I was gonna be on fire, and I get lost in things easily. My creative process is a very explorative one. I have songs that sometimes I sit with for years until I find that one thing about it. Like there's this song called Journey that I had for years. I had the whole song. I just couldn't figure out what the drums were supposed to do. And my studio, especially when I was younger, like the studio I had at my dad's house, it was a bit of organized chaos. And people used to laugh because like I used to have these Post-it notes. And I used to write songs on these Post-it notes. And like that song sat on a Post-it note for years. And a lot of people liked it. And I was like, yeah, I like it. I just don't know. I don't know rhythmically what it's supposed to do. I was just playing around the piano, and Miles Mosley, bass player, jumped on the drums and randomly just played the perfect rhythm for that song. Oh, there it is. Now you go from a Post-it note to manuscript paper, and off you go to the bandstand. I can move fast if I need to. I have a deadline or something like that. But I'm the kind of person, I have a bunch of songs, like, this book here full of songs that I'm just fiddling with. I kind of go like that. I'll write a song, and then I write another song tomorrow, and I write another song, and then I go back to that song I wrote 3 days ago, mess around with it. That's kind of my process. It's my strength and my weakness, because I can get sidetracked on something and get too focused on that, drop a week, and not even realize what happened to it,
I wanted to talk about maybe a different direction. So writing a song from scratch and finding these pieces and assembling that versus discovering something that is fascinating and reimagining that. Clair de Lune, actually, your version of it came up in a prior episode with the founder of Automatic, the company who makes WordPress. And it's like 50% of the web runs on this platform. And he's a jazz fan. And we started talking about that. And he just went on and on about Clair de Lune and how magical it is, which is interesting because I too have that same connection to that song. I've already written it in my will. I told my wife, this is the song I want played at my funeral. It's powerful. It's like a musical cathedral. There are some songs that are already just magnificent, in their first imagining. And my understanding is that took a long time to build, took years to build originally. But why revisit that song? What was it that attracted you to it? And tell us a little bit more. Take us into the process of reorchestrating it.
In general, for me, I'm a music head. I love listening to music. And from time to time, I'll hear something in a song. I just hear a song and I go, oh, man. I'll just hear it. I'll be listening to the way it is, and I'll hear another way it could be. And I hear it. I'm interested we did this way. Now, with Clair de Lune, that is what happened, but I had a mentor named Gerald Wilson. And, we would talk about music a lot. And, he loved Debussy, and he's always just talk about how soulful he was. He talked about soulful those romantic French composers were. That idea, that juxtaposition of kind of like this dude from the late 1800s, early 1900s, in French guy, probably with a puffy shirt, like this, like a soulful person. I was looking for it. I was like, I wonder what Gerald meant by that.
Yeah.
And I was listening to that song, and I was like, man, this is like the blues.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, baby, I heard it, and I was listening to it. I was like, man, we could play this song like that. So then it turns into, just kind of brainstorm. I was like, man, but after the intro, I was like, instead of playing the middle of the song as an intro, so like we played the song up to one point, and the intro is at the breaking point of, you know what I mean? So that was just me wanting to give a nod to the original. And then when we started playing it, it was like, man, I just had this vision of like this beautiful celestial being coming down to earth and kind of meeting all these soulful people. I'm lucky that I grew up with musicians that I've known my whole life. And so usually when I have an idea, they just immediately understand it. And so when I said, we're going to play this classical song, like it's just straight soul, oh, okay. I roll out some of the parts and just kind of showed them what I was thinking, but they kind of got it straight away.
I would love to talk about spirituality with you. Every time I listen to any of your work, that's the feeling I have, is like some spiritual connection. I don't know if that's what you're telling me when I listen to your music, but I feel like Claire de Lune is one example, but there's so many other, like Truth is another song where I feel like you want to show us something. Like you want to show us something that's bigger than us. And I want to know what that is. Like what are you showing us and where does that come from?
That's hard to answer. I do truly believe that this life, that who we are, what I am, what we are, is more than just flesh and bone. I do feel like we have spirits, and like we're spiritual beings, and that's why music affects us in the way it does, because it's a medium that really kind of mixes those two levels of reality, and that's why music has the power it has. Over us. It's kind of inexplicable. It's hard to explain why you love a song. It's really hard. Even if you're, the greatest musical theorist ever, it's hard to really explain what makes a good song a good song. And I think that it is putting a piece of who you are. And I think that it's possible in any form. It's possible in a poem. It's possible in a painting. It's possible in a clay pot. It's possible in some food that you make. You can put a piece of that deeper self of who you are, that other part of yourself. Not that your body is not yourself, but there's another part of yourself that we can't see. And if you put that into what you're doing, it speaks to people. I feel like there's something in all of us that wants a connection on that level. When I go see a Rembrandt painting, I feel it. Like, man, there's something else in that thing, or, I can go and eat someone's food and go like, man, this is, you really putting your soul into it. And so when I first started playing music, first thing my dad did, like the very first thing he did was he took me to my uncle's church. And it was like, this is where we're going to learn how to play music. Like when I really started playing saxophone, he was like, let's go here and let's go play. And when I was playing there, all that music was made for some greater purpose. So my original foundation in music kind of comes from there. It was like, we're doing this to praise God. And it was like, oh, wow. Okay. And you could feel it. I used to play at this church, and there was this lady that she used to sit in the back of the church. She wouldn't join the choir. If we played and sang good enough, she would catch the spirit and sing over the whole choir and the whole band with our speakers and everything, and just bring everybody to tears. But we had to get her there. As you start to play music, when you start tapping into that, you start tapping into your spirit, you start tapping into your soul, you start tapping into something that's more than what, we see. It just feels good. It's the best version of music. It just really is. And that's the reason why. It just feels good to play music that way. It's the music I love the most, And so whenever I make music, I'm usually trying to get there. And there's different ways, different paths, different ways, different avenues. And I love trying new paths and new ways to get there. But I'm always trying to get there. For no other reason than it feels good to get. It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good over there.
The video for Truth feels like a visual embodiment of the feeling of so much of your music. How much of that was you kind of directing that, or was that a collaborative process? What was that like?
Oh, definitely a collaborative process. AZ Rojas is another one of those people that he puts his soul into what he does, The idea of Truth is that it's a 6-part movement where the first 5 movements, you play these 5 songs, and in the 6-part Truth, we're playing all 5 songs at the same time. It's kind of a metaphor for just the reality that as much as it seems like we fight over dominance over each other, we fight for our place at the table, there's room for everybody. There's room for all of us, and it was a very like serendipitous thing, because when I brought that song to record, I told the musicians, told the guys in the band, like what we're gonna do. And they're like, okay. And so first thing we did was record the 5 songs separately. And never forget, like, after we recorded the 5th song, they were like, we're gonna play all that together at the same time? But they didn't believe it. They didn't believe that these songs, these melodies could be played at the same time. Now that's perfect. That's just perfect, because that is the whole point of this, is that we don't believe I can let you be who you are and I can be who I am, and we can be right up next to each other and it can be fine. I don't need to change you and you don't need to change me. We can just be together. And it's beautiful, actually. Not just fine, it's beautiful. It'll be beautiful, us right next to each other, learning from each other, bouncing off each other, interacting with each other. And that was the idea of it. And so I want to give it that like almost another dimension by also having this idea be expressed in other mediums at the same time. So I had my sister create paintings, 5 paintings in the same way, 5 paintings, and then she would combine those 5 paintings in a 6th painting. And then I asked H. Rojas to do the same thing with a video montage. He did short clips for each individual song, and that culminated into him making a video for Truth. I just talked to him about what I thought about life and the world, what I thought about that piece, and he came up with a beautiful treatment. And, AJ and I, that's how we kind of usually work. I kind of usually just kind of tell him what the music that I'm making, like what it means to me. And then he'll come up with a way of how to express that meaning. And then we'll shoot it. And then we'll kind of come together to kind of like figure out how to like, really get it to line up and really kind of be one thing, And we both kind of, I think we hear music, we hear life, we have a good synergy in how we see things. But no, he created that treatment and directed it. And we worked together, obviously, to get it to its final stage, but that was his work.
Your dad plays a part in your newest album. And I remember hearing a story of growing up, you're a hip hop fan, and you first started realizing that they're sampling these jazz records, and your dad's got this big collection of records, and you actually start taking them and moving them into your own space. And you sort of, that music that was his kind of became yours in a certain way. And then now it feels, I don't know if full circle is the right way to phrase it, but now he's playing together with you on an album. How does it feel? It must be a pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, I still got his records. Yeah, my dad, he was my teacher, and he was my access point for anything I wanted to do musically. So if there's a book I wanted, he probably already had it. If there was an instrument I wanted to play, he probably had it. If there was something I couldn't understand in music, I could always go to him, and he would tell me what's going on. My dad made a decision when we were very young to focus more on teaching so that he could be home to raise us. He didn't want to go on the road and have us not have him around, And so, I remember being a kid and, before all the famous people, my first role model was him. And I remember I was just wish he would go out and play more. I used to ask him all the time, why do you go play? Like, man, I gotta get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, And so that came out the same year he retired. And so when I got my first tour, and that had been a dream for me to actually tour my own music. And I asked him if he wanted to come on tour with us. He said, yeah. And it was great for me. It was like a childhood dream for me to see him playing every night and really like doing his thing. He always makes a cameo or something like that on my records. And, to have him be more featured on this last record was great, and I'm always happy to, to be able to have Pops be involved. And he's the reason why I'm a musician. There's just no other way to put it. I'm a big fan of, sticking with the people that stuck with me, and Pops has been there since day one, obviously. So it's great. And I love hearing him play and hearing his contribution. And it was funny because when we were kids, he's always yelling at us because we didn't sound good. And now, now he's playing with us. So he don't yell at us no more.
You can yell back, I guess.
Yeah.
That's great. You've talked about a number of the amazing people that you've worked with, and there's a much longer list that we could go into, but I wonder if we could talk about just a couple people to see what you learned from them. One person I'm particularly curious about is Wayne Shorter, because Wayne was just an amazing human being. There's a great documentary done on him recently. And so, listeners, if you don't know much about Wayne Shorter and you want to just know a little bit about how people around him thought about him, go check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. You got to meet him in high school, is that right?
Yeah, first time I went Wayne Shorter was in high school. He came down to that band, the multi-school jazz band that I told you about. Yeah, he came and he sat right next to me. And literally, like, Wayne Shorter was the reason why I wanted to play saxophone. Art Blakely and the Jazz Messengers was my favorite band in elementary school. And it was the version that had Wayne Shorter that was my favorite version of that band, Shorter and Lee Morgan. I mean, I love, obviously, all the different variations of the band, but that one was just, that was my one, you know? I'll never forget it. He was sitting next to me, and I was like, I gotta say something. I gotta say something. I gotta say something. I don't know what to say. All I can think of to say, I was like, hey, man, were you and Lee Morgan friends? You guys sound like you were friends. He kind of laughed. I didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to play with Wayne. I had a few. You know, I had that time played once for the Monk Institute's saxophone competition. I wasn't in the competition, but I played with him with George Duke. I had a chance to play with his band, a tribute for him. But I studied his music my whole life. And Wayne Shorter, to me, is just like a guiding light into the endless possibilities of creativity. I think that's what any Wayne Shorter fan kind of loves the most, is that Wayne just feels like he's always coming from the most honest place. And he has such a creative spirit. He hears the notes that no one else would have. And he's so comfortable in that space, the uniquely Wayne Shorter space. And it's so beautiful to hear, you know, and it's so beautiful to see. And it, to me, what inspired me the most was just to be comfortable in being myself, not to get too caught up into trying to be something that I think other people want me to be, to just be happy and to be grateful and to explore and to enjoy who I am. That's what I got the most from Wayne. Probably more from listening to him in that documentary too. It's like, it was kind of like very affirming.
Yeah.
When I got to really hear him talk about that stuff, I was like, oh wow. I said, I thought you meant that. And even like just playing with his band. And then, you know, when I played with this band, they were trying to pass on a lot of the things they learned from him to Terrace, and I both played with him. And I feel like, you know, I grew so much from that one experience, you know. And the few times that I did get a chance to play with him or next to him, felt like I got so much out of them. Even though they were short and they were far between, they had a meaningful and lasting effect on me.
The last person I'll ask you about is Herbie Hancock, because I think he's a different type of guy. He was best friends with Wayne Shorter, also an LA guy. Presumably your paths cross semi-regularly. He's been touring recently. What have you learned from your interactions with Herbie?
Yes, I've had more opportunities to play music with Herbie. I feel like the thing I learned from Herbie is a similar thing. Like I told him all the time, I told him that's my song yesterday. I feel like Herbie has his own harmony that God set aside just for him. And nobody else can tap into it but him. As many people try to copy Herbie Hancock and they learn his solos and they try to play like him, there is a place that only he can get to. And the most kind of profound lesson that I find that I'm able to grasp for some reason more like wholly when I get a chance to play with them is that there is no wrong notes. There is no wrong place. There's just different places in music. And that's a very powerful state of mind to be in. If you can get yourself into that state of mind, then none of the possibilities are closed off to you. And that is how you get to those uniquely, you know, personal spaces that they seem to just live in. It's like they seem to just live in these spaces that's like, man, no one else plays that. How do you get there all the time? I think it comes from that feeling of like, I can go anywhere. I can do anything. I can play any note I want over this chord. But what note do I want to play? Do I want to play? Do I actually want to play? What note am I actually compelled to play? What am I actually feeling? What do I actually want to do in this moment? It sounds simple, but it's very difficult actually. But it's so beautiful and it's so fulfilling when you can get into that space. You know, with Herbie, I had more time with Herbie, and we did a tour together. Like we were doing shows together, like a tour in that sense. He was 80 years old, and I felt like he sounded better than he ever sounded.
Totally.
Who is their best at 80? And I was like, wow, man, music, you really can keep growing in this. You really can keep doing this. Here he is. He's doing it. I'm looking at him. And as good as Herbie has been all his whole career, somehow, some way, he's even further now than he was then. It was super inspiring to hear it every night.
Kamasi, I'm not as much of a jazz aficionado as Aaron, but there are a few albums that I really love, and probably because they were introduced by my grandfather who played jazz piano. One is just the classic Duke Ellington and John Coltrane album back from the early 60s. And I kind of want to get my kids into more jazz music. They might not like that particular style, but I'm certainly going to share your music. But I'm just wondering if there's any artist right now that you're sharing with your kids or that are inspiring you that would make a good kind of like segue into these different realms of music.
You know, music is so much more related than we sometimes realize, you know. So like when I heard Art Blakey Jazz Messages, it reminded me of NWA. It's just something about the energy of it. It just had that same feel, you know. And then, you know, I was also listening to like Tribe Called Quest and stuff like that. And so they were sampling some of that stuff. And it was just a connection between that. And that kind of like made it feel familiar to me. And then that was the start of my journey. And then from there, I learned this and I started liking that. And then, you know, it just kind of goes from there. I mean, my daughter actually started off really into like some pretty heavy stuff. Like Eric Dolphy was her favorite.
Nice.
It was like 2 weeks old. We drove her mother crazy because she only wanted to listen to Eric Dolphy for like a year straight. But, you know, since then, she's kind of grown. What I kind of usually try to do is I listen to like whatever she's into, and then I just offer her up things that I feel like are adjacent to that. At one point, she was, you know, really, really into Michael Jackson. So I started playing her some Weather Report and other stuff like that. I looked at what she was into, and it's just there's such a wide range. Jazz music has so much in there. And I would just play the music that I thought she would like, you know, based off the music that she already liked. And I found with her that as I just play music around and I mix it in with the stuff that she's listening to, it just makes it feel like it fits.
Fantastic. Kamasi, it's been such a treat to talk to you. The new record is Fearless Movement. It's wonderful. It's a great record. I've spent the whole morning just enjoying this in my living room. So thank you so much for being on Design Better.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Eli Woolery and me, Aaron Walter, with engineering and production support from Brian Paik of Pacific Audio. If you found this episode useful, we hope that you'll leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to finer shows. Or simply drop a link to the show in your team's Slack channel, designbetterpodcast.com. It'll really help others discover the show. Until next time.